Hello YouTube, welcome back. Have you ever driven along a road in the Northern Rivers and come across an old farm like this? I mean, it's on great land here in Eureka, but the trees are well overgrown, the canopies are all meshed together, there's no ground cover on the ground, there's a bit of nut on the trees on the outside, and you just wonder what they're doing. And here's this particular property here. You can barely read the sign now. It says Park Properties. And yeah, look, it just makes the mind wonder what's behind this farm, who runs it now. You can see some basic signs of maintenance in a sort of a sloppy way. But yeah, big overgrown orchard full of obviously Hawaiian varieties. You wonder what the history of it is, and you wonder who I might get to ask about it. Here's a guy I can ask, Bruce Chester. Welcome back to the Macadamia Show, Bruce.
Pleasure to be here, Daniel.
I thought you might have been around as long as this farm I'd seen is around at Park Properties, and so I thought I'd come and ask you. So you do know about Park Properties, as it turns out. You've got a bit of a connection yourself. So what's the story?
To introduce it, it was preschool for macadamias for me, but it's also basic tax. It was in 1976 when John Howard, as Treasurer, dropped the highest income tax rate from 66.6 cents in the dollar to 60 cents in the dollar, and that was on every
outrageous.
Dollar. Well, it was on every dollar you earned from over 35 grand. So that's where the comparison is outrageous to today. Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
Superannuation guarantees and things like that. Paul Keating hadn't brought those in by a long way yet, and so the upper echelons of the Packer empire, let's call it, okay? So you've got your print in Consolidated Press and your TV in Publishing and Broadcasting, to be paying them good money to keep them in Australia and working for Kerry, needless to say. The scheme of superannuation came up where obviously the expenses you incur in this are a good expense against your total income in that year,
right.
But you're building an asset that won't return you additional income until about 10 years when you're much closer to retirement, if not retired, and you have the asset. So in theory, that's how this was born.
Well, if the government was going to take 2/3 of your income or 60% of your income, you wanted to sink it into something that made a short-term loss or was an investment in future income,
Yep.
but not giving you income right now.
Correct.
Right.
My old man summed it up beautifully for me one day, okay, with the idiocy of the 2/3.
Yeah.
He goes, listen, if I want to drink a $10 bottle of whiskey a week, okay, I got to earn myself $30 before I can do it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that puts it into a perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And
I mean, we see all of these things. There's good and bad in tax incentives. The reason why Paul Keating ultimately got to introduce superannuation was because both state and federal governments were taxing everybody's savings accounts. And in fact, one of them even had the audacity to have it titled a BAD tax, which I gather was bank account deposits. I'm unsure.
Oh, yes, that's right. And then FID, yes, all of that. But 1970s predates a lot of the macadamia industry here. So who was the thinker? Who was behind thinking? Let's put it into macadamias.
My old man, Harry Chester, he was really the instigator for this, and he ran it until he unfortunately died in 1979.
Right. So he put it in Kerry Packer's ear.
Yeah.
That macadamias is the thing.
This is really a way we can reward our executives without being really undermined by government tax. Bear in mind, you've got a lot of people over in America in particular and England as well who really want top television in particular, executives.
Yeah.
And best example was Peter Feynman, the executive producer on the Tonight Shows and everything. Ultimately, worked with John Cornell to achieve Crocodile Dundee. But I remember they bought him an XJS Jag to top off where they bumped up things. We're not talking fringe benefit tax.
Because it was this was pre-fringe benefits and also pre-capital gains tax too. So
the capital gains tax was actually in a very subtle form well before that. There was Section 26A, which said that if you bought an asset with the intention of making a profit, it was taxable. Then Section 52 said if you didn't notify the taxman that you bought the asset with the intention of making a profit at the time, then any loss that you made wasn't tax deductible. So, or write-offable.
So you had to tell
them. They had you covered. And when they found that people were turning over things within 12 months, they introduced Section 26 AAA, which was that anything that's turned over within 12 months is capital gains taxable anyway. So that existed before the capital gains tax did.
Right,
Simple
interesting.
And easy.
So there were those disincentives there.
Absolutely, all the way along. Here's where the Tax Act becomes. You can use the Tax Act as a weapon. Okay, you really can. I'm not talking about the government there. What we've got is this convoluted mongrel of a thing.
It's over 1,000 pages.
It's shambolic. And we've had people of the calibre of Ken Hendry, all of those people come in and do so many goddamn, let's check this out, and makes it as far as Parliament gets buried. However, let me give you a really good side, or two actually, of the Tax Act and how it can be used, okay? First up, we have this wonderful tax that was implemented on us as farmers, well, not just us macadamias, in 1993-ish, the Research and Development Tax. Now, of which I think Macadamia Society puts about 65% into marketing and 35% into research and development. But it certainly is the reason why our knowledge was able to be exported to the world, particularly to the South African countries, which has been of such benefit to them as well. It's not to our detriment, I promise you.
But because the research and development was a tax deduction, wasn't it?
Well, we all got slugged with the levy, okay?
Yep.
And the research and development tax is that the government matches dollar for dollar with what the levy raises. And that way it gets to divide in order to conquer, okay, into industries. Now, we pay the macadamia. If the organics people had had their act together at this time, I'm going to say to you right here and now, okay, if they'd said, right, well, we're going to fight it on an individual basis, we don't want organic vegetables, organic macadamias, etc. If they said the organic industry represents this much of a collection, and if the government's going to match it dollar for dollar, then we've got this much at our disposal. Now, if they had their act together, okay, bear in mind, I'm not happy with this sort of development that occurred. With those resources, they would have sorted problems representing organic produce with really efficient distribution, really efficient, and really good packaging. And they would have thought this through. There's a potential that just flies out the window.
But look, leave that to one side. Obviously, the packers weren't interested in organics.
Oh, of course, no. You just can't do it on this size scale, and you and I know this, okay? No, this was pioneering stuff, CSR, as we talked about.
They were in the 60s, but the craze didn't happen till the 80s, and then the packers were getting in this in the 70s. So
dentists, doctors, all of those sorts of people who had a 60 cent dollar tax problem were ploughing it in. There's places all through Clunes, all through your area, through to Federal, etc. Okay, all of those areas basically started through all of this mid-70s stuff. And that instigation that really drew attention to the plight of 66.6 was dropping it to 60 cents in the dollar. Oh, gee, look at what we can, let's start playing with some scientific tax information.
Sure. Sure.
Now, as far as I know of, Kerry never went up to the farm. Okay.
Right.
The old man.
Well, explain to us, because park properties, plural. I saw the sign saying park properties, and I thought, well, usually they say it's something farm or something orchard, but park properties, plural. What does that mean?
Okay. What it was they originally bought 200 acres on 6 titles. Okay. You start getting
200 hectares, maybe.
200 hectares.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to say 200 acres. There wouldn't be much to go around. Yeah,
hectares,
yeah.
Okay.
But 6 titles, right?
On 6 titles. It was a dairy farm that had many other. Okay, it was thousands of hectares. All right.
Wow. Okay.
But you're allowed to take off little pieces when you get over 100 acres was the official one.
Yep.
So this had 6 titles allocated to this beautiful little valley with a spring creek running through it. Okay, I believe it's Benny's Creek now from memory. Where did that come from? I think I might be right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you've got the entities, and there were 6 separate things. Firstly, there was a house where I think you might have taken your old park property sign out the front of, which John, they did up so that John, who worked on Kerry's farm, Canton, could actually, he had a decent place to live. There was our farm, which was called Chichley. Then you had the TV guys, and that was the heads of, we'll call it PBL, okay, which is really your field company, but you had people like Sam Chisholm, David Evans, Jim Mackay, top echelon guys.
So 6 farms, 6 packer upper echelon people, including Kerry himself.
Yeah, well, that's
and you don't think Kerry
on 3 farms at the moment. Okay, the 4th one was the print guys. And that's the reason why it got called Rating Nut Farm, because they wanted to compete against the TV guys on their own terms. Okay, so
it's called rating farm.
The key to park properties is that the address of the head office of Consolidated Press Holdings is 54 Park Street. It's got nothing to do with
Park Street.
What a lovely roaming field.
Tell you what, I worked half my career within a stone's throw of Park Street, and that farm does not look like Park Street. So it was named after Park Street, Sydney.
Oh, Park Street. That's where park properties.
Oh, what do you know? Gee, that's funny. So 6 properties in the end, and there was one of them in the middle, I think. That was owned by the rest.
I haven't mentioned Gretel Farm.
Yes.
And here you go. If you can imagine,
who's Gretel?
Gretel was Kerry's mother and also Kerry's daughter.
Right.
But Gretel was Kerry's mum.
So a name in the Packer family.
So Frank had, his initial wife was Gretel, and when she died, he remarried to Lady Florence. He was Sir Frank by this stage.
Yep.
So people don't sort of associate the Gretel with Kerry's mum, because he had James and Gretel as kids.
Yeah.
So...
but in 1976 then, your dad buys one of these...
he actually set the whole thing up, so yes, he's allocated.
But what was your reaction to that? You had an interest.
Stoked.
You loved it.
I was stoked. I was already coming up and surfing at Byron Bay. There was an artist called Richard Clapton who had a song called Blue Bay Blues. I remember when I was working at 2SM. Yeah. And I'd be driving my combi to work and everything, and Blue Bay Blues would come on, and it even mentions Byron Bay, okay? I'd almost have a tear in my eye going, one of these days, okay?
And of course you did in the end.
Here's my gateway.
Yeah.
Here's my gateway. Wow.
So your dad then buys this, and he sets it up, and obviously you started injecting yourself into that then, did you?
Yeah. Well, here's one thing. You either dip your toe into the fountain of life or you fully immerse yourself.
Sure.
I'm of the latter character.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I gather from our discussions that you are. But so the farms start getting developed and they start getting planted out. And I think, thanks to your ability to save photos, we've actually got a couple of early shots of these. These are from the 70s?
This is about 77, 78 when the place was just planted out.
Right.
They dammed up under the name of Gretel Farm. Gretel Farm was actually owned by Canton, Chichley, Rating Nut Farm and Eureka. So it was the
all the others,
mothership
right?
where you could amortise plants rather than depreciate them and incur all the expenses of putting in dams, irrigation, etc.
And I don't know if the subscribers can see it, but there's a shed on here with a great big "G'day" painted on the top. Who did that?
Green and gold, my brother and I, Dougie and myself, we did that.
To the shed, near the
I gotta
dam.
tell you, okay, I truly found out how hot it becomes on a hot tin roof
in a shed.
Summer. Okay,
I found out that one. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it looks like over here, you've got photos of young trees, pretty much. Now, what in the 70s were they planting?
Hawaiian varieties only were all we really had, other than H2. The predominant 246, 508, H2. There were a few little offshoots. I'm unsure what they were, but it was all Hawaiian stock, all what the Department of Primary Industries was advocating.
They were recommending at the time.
And bear in mind, you've got to fit in with the requirements of the Tax Act, so you've got to be seen to follow officialdom. Okay.
Right. Or else you might be playing funny buckets with the farm.
Well, then you're going to attract their attention. It's not worth sticking your head above the trenches.
Yeah. and some of these photos here are showing, it looks like storm damage from 1984. Was that a bad year?
In 79, a big storm went through.
Right.
In 84, another huge storm came through. I just retired, and so to speak, okay, taking a sabbatical, let's call it.
Yeah.
And I could see what was happening to this place.
Right.
And so I started reporting to Bob Henty, who took over from my old man in looking after the park properties within Consolidated Press.
That looks like a very young Bruce Chester, that does.
Yeah, look.
What a hunk you were, eh? Look at this.
I was going to say, he is a most unattractive man.
No, not at all. But you were obviously, this is before you bought your own farm here in Fernley.
Well before. This is 1984. I didn't make it up here until 87.
Right. And you were at that stage interested in what looks like erosion by the look of these photos.
It was the problems that you could see that had happened from the way we planted. In volume 9, I was intrigued, Daniel.
That's with Peter Fraser.
Yeah. I was intrigued, not only with the way he identified the taproot in the pots, which everybody just ignored, but with the augering and everything to drill your holes. And, the fact that there was pot-bound stuff wasn't because they were in the pots too long. This is a great example, actually.
Yeah.
It was a huge,
I'll move on to that. But what's this? Is this photo here the amount of erosion that you were showing?
You can see where grass level is, okay?
Yeah.
If I'm lying along the ground, I'm taking a photo at ground level.
Yeah.
And this is just standing up, you can see how much soil has been lost.
That's a lot.
It's
that had to be a foot, or close to.
Oh, jolly close, okay. Yeah. And you have a look at the trails that it sets.
Is this what you're talking about, the root pattern? Because this tree here looks like it's got roots twisted around on themselves.
Absolutely.
And what was that from?
Well, they only augured the holes. Nobody broke the sides of the holes to let the roots go through what effectively was a soil wall. So it retards the growth of the roots outwards.
And the growths looked like they turned around in a circle.
And underneath that, those two photos you've got a tree, a decent size with the same size trunk as what I'm showing, where the root ball actually only, and yet you can see in that next photo.
So your arm span that's the size of a root ball of a mature tree.
This was supposedly mature tree, yeah.
And there you are again in the next photo.
And there's a mature tree. How much of the root ball is underneath the foliage cover? Come on, give me a break. That thing's pot brown.
Yeah, no, look, well, it must have been pot bound, but I mean, we all know macadamias have a smallish root ball, but that was too small.
Much.
Clearly. And you had a lot of storm damage, obviously, when the wind came along.
Enormous.
Yep. And you started, by the look of it, I think you said you had codes for storm damage.
I did.
So blue with a circle.
So blue with a circle around it means major damage, and if the tree survives, in all probability it will be no good.
Right.
Certainly not number one nut kernel quality anyway.
Yeah.
And a circle around it means that the tree is leaning.
Right.
Okay, so that's the combination of blue and green. This is pre-computer programs.
Right.
So Looney Bruce goes running around with a set of coloured pencils. And
Well, this is massive, and look, I don't know how much it's gonna show up on YouTube, but this is possibly A2 sized paper. You could make a tablecloth out of it. It has dots, coloured dots, circles, lines, literally all over it. And this was a map of all of Park Properties, or just your dad's
the
one?
trees on Chichley, of which there's 4,000.
Right. So there were 4,000 trees, and you've colour coded every single one of them. I can't believe you did it, Bruce. And they've all got codes for the wind damage that happened in which year?
1984
This is the
was
84.
when I got to observe it. Maybe some had carried over from 79, but
Right.
this was 1984 audit in my book.
So that was a massive storm, whatever it was.
Oh,
Was it a
huge.
cyclone, or was it, or what was it?
Yes, it was an East Coast flow, I think they like to refer to them as.
Ah.
I tell you, the 1979 one, here's irony for you, Daniel.
Yeah.
The bloke who ultimately bought Park Properties
Yeah.
was a guy called David McRae, and he owned Pacific Plantations and has set up a city of macadamias in China.
Now I think we've even got the sale brochure for that, haven't we? Look,
we do.
Here it is. Here is the 1991 sale brochure, auction, believe it or not. 6 titles, Park Properties, and there's the map of the whole area. Now I'm sure that some of this is actually up for sale right now. It looks so familiar to a listing I've seen, but it has no residences on it, so maybe it's not all of the properties, it would be some of them.
If it's on Eureka Road, it'll be either Racing Nut or Eureka, and if it's on Springvale Hill Road, pardon me,
It's on
Chichley or Canton.
Yeah, no, it's Eureka Road. So these were all of, there's Rating Farm, which
was the press guys.
very, very Kerry Packer. Eureka Farm, Canton Park Farm, Chichley Farm, which was your family one, which was 20 odd acres. Gretel Farm was really just a home, wasn't it? It was only about 4 hectares.
No, it actually was a very important thing because, as I said, it was the mothership for all of the bulk expenses of Park Properties.
But it itself was only about 10 acres.
Yes, it is, and it also grew tea for the Department of Agriculture, or Primary Industries, they were called then.
Right.
And some passion fruit, I think, as well.
Right. Wonderful. Isn't that out on? There's a great big dehusking plant, which I presume must still be there, and there's the big dam.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And I guess you don't remember exactly what it sold for, the 6 titles, but they all sold to the one guy.
Oh yes, David McRae.
From that, and that's Pacific Farms, effectively.
Pacific Plantations.
Yeah.
And how I led into his name, because I deviated us from this, was in the 79 storm. He had built a house up on the hill here on Friday Hut Road that was modelled on Queensland Government House.
Right.
And it was beautiful. This thing was shattered by this storm.
The house?
The house.
Oh.
It was all over the hillside. I mean all over the hillside.
That's a horror.
Oh, frightening.
Now, before we go away from these photos, because this is fabulous, this looks like, apparently this is a harvester?
It was the sweeper and harvester, yes, all combined. The
'Cause
sweeper would theoretically drag it out into the path of the harvesting wheels. This is
Right.
1984, and it is very, very early harvesting. They'd only just figured out that the wheels on the
pinwheels.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they got those from the idea from the golf driving ranges.
Oh, okay,
That's
they
how
picked up golf balls.
Yeah.
Oh, is that how it happened?
That's where it came from.
But this is a very big machine on a very big tractor.
Oh,
I mean,
jeez.
yeah, I mean, compared to what the soil compaction they must have caused is amazing. But I thought a lot of those early harvesters had blowers, not sweepers.
Well, out the side,
Yeah.
and they did, yes. But I much preferred the sweeper.
Yeah.
Or I got hold of the sweeper. I really didn't get the blower as much. And I think the sweeper actually preceded the blower.
Right.
I can stand to be very correct on that.
Wouldn't surprise me.
But that was basically what was left behind it afterwards with, an example of the nuts that are sitting there.
Right. And this photo here is look, just one of the farms.
Yeah, it's on Rating Nut Farm from Chichley. But it reminds me a lot of some of the things I've seen on your Nutkin Farm YouTube channel with, we're looking straight down rows of macadamia.
Yeah, exactly. Although these have got nice row spacing and they've got ground cover, and now, of course, the whole
they were 12 by 10 plantings. 12 by 10. I can tell you that here and now.
Yeah, but they've even outgrown that now, some of these. Now, this one was interesting too, this photo. It's got macadamia trees with some netting, almost in a tent style, underneath the tree. What's that about?
That was an experiment we tried. And we also tried to put gutters on the side so that with the gravity of the nuts dropping onto them, you roll it down and you've got a fairly one instance lane of nut to pick up from on either side of the tree.
Right.
It would allow for vacuum harvesting, but it certainly hand picking makes it much easier.
Right. Now, what was the problem with that?
The major problem is that the snakes get caught in it and snakes can't go in reverse, and by crikey, they're angry by the time you get to them.
I think you'd even get a python angry, and they're pretty peaceful.
But you could still throw your pelletised fertiliser through the nets and everything like that. It was, in theory, practical. Okay, that's the best thing I can
Did it stop erosion as such, or not really?
It helped to impede it a touch, but I'm on a flat site there where we tried it, and so it wasn't a good test, Daniel, I'm going to say to you.
Yeah. Now, it looks like at some point you tried irrigation, because I'm seeing irrigation lines off the trees.
Yeah. Initially, irrigation, that's why everybody had to put in a dam, computer irrigation, all of this latest technical stuff. Good tax deduction, Daniel.
Yeah.
So it stimulated that industry. However, after 2 years, the macadamia tree doesn't require any of that watering. Otherwise, you're going to keep its roots shallow to the surface and you wind up with wind damage like what we've just been through in 1984 here.
So you're teaching the tree to have a small root ball?
Yes, you are.
If
you're
it's
not encouraging them to go and pursue water any depth.
Right.
Okay.
Well, at least in our area anyway, probably wasn't needed.
Well, that's where the wind it plays devastated for us.
Yeah.
And with along the ground, they all filled with ants' nests. So you had to go and replace little nozzles and everything like that. So in those photos, I was showing how it developed and evolved into where you'd actually string them through the trees, at least anyway, the lines.
Now, this wasn't your farm, but tell us what's involved here, because I'm seeing this wall of macadamia. It's clearly been hedged, has it?
Oh, yeah. And only planted 3 metres apart. In your volume 8, I mentioned to you a thing called Macadam's farm where the trees were espaliered.
Right.
And this is it. This is it.
Right. But gee, what a that'd be a terrible method.
Have a look. You've got to use, one of those
this is
cherry
done
pickers. You've got spray tanks that have to reach 20, 40 feet in the air.
It's one hell of a spray rig.
Well, have a think about how little light gets down to how much of the tree.
And when roughly would these photos have been taken?
They were taken 1984, 85.
So again, this is before the real craze.
Oh, absolutely. I can't remember why I had that. It was probably left over.
Yeah.
Now, we had this huge shed, all irrigated, beside the dam, and that was where the trees were all grown from the seed, grafted, etc. They were all planted through 76, 77. By 78, this beautiful shed beside a dam and everything has no further use. So what do you do with it? You grow orchids for Big W.
And there's an orchid.
Okay.
Well, that's a fascinating story. But I guess between then and now, something's gone wrong. I mean, there's been these crazy years. Obviously, the Packers got in early. They got out in 91 by the look of that real estate brochure.
What necessitated it was that in 86, Kerry sold the 9 stations, TCN and TDB, to Bond, and you've got this complex structure of superannuation with your high executives, some of whom are going off to Bond Media, etc., etc., etc. So you've got to start divvying it up. Obviously, it took 5 years. Kerry's fairly flush with money at that sort of stage of the game. But that wasn't it. If we didn't, they threw dollars at the problem in setting it up, certainly not in getting out of it, okay? But he had to pay out each of these people who had an investment in this place and take it all on as park properties to be able to sell it.
So you're saying Kerry bought out everyone else?
Everybody.
And eventually just sold?
And sold, yeah.
Right.
Without ever having gone up there, to the best of my knowledge.
Wow. And having owned a farm and never seen it. Apparently, the head of Samsung owns farms around the area here as well.
Okay.
And I'm sure he ever comes and sees it as well. All I know is that he likes macadamias.
Well,
Yeah.
I got to tell you, when we were at Channel 9, okay, Kerry had the huge ranch in the Northern Territory, Newcastle Waters.
Oh, yes.
Okay, there were 3 places that we had to make sure the signal went to. Okay, and Kerry had multiple channels through all of that.
Yeah.
Newcastle Waters was one. So we're up in the Northern Territory. You're going to beam a signal specifically for Kerry. Okay, it's Channel 9 signal with American stuff that we could bring into Channel 9 in Sydney, etc.
Okay.
And the other one was St Vincent's Hospital, where the Kerry Packer Wing, okay, as they called it. Let me say, okay, it wasn't some rich, luxurious thing. Kerry contributed so much to firstly St Vincent's and secondly Dr. Victor Chang, whilst it was all able to do that.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm going to tell you, this is not free lunch, okay? This was really well earned. Okay? He was a very good man, Kerry.
Yeah. And he obviously felt strongly about some things, yeah, and then he had the courage to go on with his commitment. But then he eventually sells, and I guess what I see, because, look, I'm a newcomer.
Yeah.
2019 for me. So, and I'm driving around the Northern Rivers and the Alstonville Plateau, and I can go to the Alstonville Plateau and see a lot of, I suspect, quite young farms that are in their prime. They're doing very well. They're cropping like crazy, beautiful land, deep red soil, all that sort of stuff. And I can come up to the Eureka, call it the Eureka Plateau, or this area, even Nashua, Fernley, Newrybar, that sort of area. And I'm seeing, I think what you said rang true in the sense of I'm seeing all of these farms that were planted in the 70s and the 80s, a lot of them overgrown. They wouldn't be producing terribly well, and yet they're sitting on absolute prime land. I mean, when I imagine when Kerry picked this, or your dad, if he picked this area, he was picking the cream of the crop of the land that was available at the time.
Absolutely.
Because these cattle farms were a dime a dozen.
And it was harder and harder for the dairy farmers. And there is an incident that occurred in 1986. Okay, here you go, where a local company that was really the superannuation for all the cow cockies around, called Northern Star Holdings, which owned television, radio and newspaper.
I've heard that name. Yeah.
Mate, it was a beautifully run enterprise, beautifully run. They even had a credit money company.
Right.
They ran Coffs Harbour, Lismore television, and they also had the radio station in Murwillumbah as well as 2LM AM in Lismore.
Yeah.
Now, Frank Lowy and David Gonski under Westfield Capital Corporation bid something like $1 billion or whatever for the 10 network. Right. But they've taken up 19.9% of Northern Star Holdings and used that as the vehicle to do it.
Right.
You see Kerry Stokes still doing it with the 7 network today. Okay, Western Australian newspapers a few years ago was the last example I remember. Yeah. But you buy 19.9%, okay, then you basically, the shareholders that you can then control, okay, they go along with you, and within, I think it took 18 months for them to lose all the money. Northern Star shares were worthless, etc., etc. I believe, and it's such a trail, the 10 network sale at that point, because I mean it was sold for something like 37 million, I think, for somebody. I traced it all back when I did. I helped publish a book called Skate, Spain and Me in 2016, and it went through all of this. But Northern Star shareholders were devastated in all of this. That was all of this retirement stuff for cow cockies went down the Gerber straight.
So you mean a lot of cattle farms became available cheaply? Because they needed to sell out.
It would have sent a lot of people into I'm going to call it despair. Financial despair can come underneath that. Despair. It was a horrible thing to do to a fabulous enterprise that really all of our local, real traditional dairy farmers
Yeah.
had invested their lives in, and it was a safe bet. It was a safe.
And yet something good came of it in the sense of, that it did help start the macadamia industry in the sense that the land became available for it.
It helped facilitate things to, take that way. And
Was-
it wasn't
was-
just macadamias. You've got a lot of now commercial good farms
Yep.
around the place.
Well, there's still some beef cattle farms around.
Aren't there ever?
Yeah.
They're more out actually along the Great Divide, Tenterfield Way, etc.
Sure, yeah.
However, you've still got some good dairy cattle farms. I used to call it Cow Kingdom. When you come through Nashua, you go across the old wooden bridge.
Yeah.
Cow Kingdom.
There's one or two left, but it's Macca's. There's fairly much Macca's now. And
Well, do you know
but why? But back to my question, if I can. But we've got all of these old farms that clearly had their heyday. They were well managed. There was an intention to make money eventually. I know it was a tax sink, as you say, but it wasn't an intention to make money eventually.
Of course.
A lot of them now seem to be just sitting fallow. They're not. They're being farmed. Like I went to Park Properties. Someone had mowed some grass, and there's some effort being made, presumably. And I've seen people cleaning up after the storm that hit Clunes like last year. But why is there a tolerance for farms that have just, they're just growing old? They can't be high.
Why would you let this happen?
Yes. Why is someone letting this happen?
A, productive land, and B, a damned good product.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But what's the answer to that? Is it just complacency, or people just not?
No, I tend to find that there was a change of ownership through the 90s. The whole
Yep.
psyche has changed. Okay.
Right.
Now people can buy a great land asset.
Yeah.
And go, but look, I'm busy doing something else at the moment where I can make far more money than farming this, and I don't want to spend the money on contractors doing the whole thing on remote control for me.
Sure.
So, I've been told by real estate agents that, mate, the first thing any purchaser is going to do is knock out all the trees and put in horse paddock.
Yeah. Well, in a way, there's a renewal involved in that. But it just seems in a way disappointing that the prime farm land that was taken up is not being rejuvenated. There's no growth between the trees. There's no ground cover. Even if you say with 10 by 12 spacing.
Yeah.
Right. From what I saw in that farm, there was just nothing between the trees, and the canopies had all merged in with each other. It was one great big hedge. And there's probably nothing going on in the middle of the blocks, but someone's doing it and someone's farming it.
It's minimal expense for you've got to walk up, start in return.
Yeah. And look, interestingly, and recently Jolyon Burnett, who's the president of the AMS, and I don't know if you've ever come across him. I've never met him myself. But he's just come up with a new article which he linked to, and it's from SAMAC, which I think is South Australian macadamias, where South Africa now has missed their target crops for like 2 years running. And what's happening is they're concluding that, look, South African orchards are now reaching that aged period. They're getting above that honeymoon period where the 4.5 tonnes a hectare they used to be boasting about and lording it over us Aussies is starting to turn into 2.5 tonnes a hectare, which is what a lot of Australian farmers are getting. And they're realising, I think, with the maturity of their orchards and the lack of sunlight in the canopy and the lack of wind through the canopy, that they're getting a lot more insect and fungus attack.
Weaker looking trees. Go on.
Yeah, which Jolyon's comment was, this all looks pretty familiar to me.
Thank you.
Right. So, we have here an industry where there are orchards in honeymoon period. They're getting great stats. They're holding up examples to the rest of us. You've got older orchards which clearly can't be performing like that. I don't care what anyone says. They're big trees and they can hold a lot of nuts, but if they're not getting the treatment they need, they won't crop. You've got the odd outlier like Peter Fraser, who's got a very old orchard with very, very old varieties, and he can turn in 6.5 tonnes a hectare by farming organically, or at least feeding organically. We're still learning as an industry.
Yeah. Can I say to you, okay, firstly, with Jolyon and same old, we've seen this before in Australia.
Yeah,
okay?
we've all seen this movie before.
Yes, we have. However, okay? And I love the scientific investigation that you actually portray.
Yeah.
And I know I'm on the loony fringe, okay? I'm one of those Shannon archetype characters with the paranormal investigation.
Yeah.
But can I say to you, okay, we've been through drought here a couple of years ago, and then massive El Nino rains.
Yep.
Okay.
I've just seen both of those conditions. I
Thank
saw
you.
the end. I saw the end of the dry
You came
conditions.
in at one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a T-shirt with the flood level 1974 that you see on all the telegraph poles around Lismore.
You can get a
okay?
T-shirt. Oh,
Jesus,
I want one of those.
Oh,
yeah.
mate. And
yeah. Well, the 1974 flood is famous.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, Lismore was completely flooded out, but even as recently as 2015, I think there was a flood.
Cyclone Debbie. She
Cyclone
came in
Debbie,
again, 2017, I think it was.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and so, we've got competing signs working their way up the telegraph poles in Lismore. It's so funny.
I've seen the marks.
Okay,
yeah,
where was I? I'm sorry.
But in terms of seeing the movie again, in terms of
Okay. All right, now we're watching South Africa. Now I'm going to be bold enough to say to you, okay, the geographical weather patterns are changing.
Yeah.
And we know that, okay? We get to the extremes where people report them, but when it affects your crop, that's possibly a thing. Now, I wouldn't generalise to the point of going, righto, well, we've reached this stage in an evolution, okay, and we're now hitting the downhill. I'd be going, okay, we've got a lull, whether it's weather related, whether it is that they have been poor enough not to be able to put in the food that they have been encouraged.
Yeah.
There are a series of alternative factors, and I like to call it layering. If you can put the layering of the things that can't be measured, okay?
Yeah.
The old piece about not everything that's measurable is important, but much of what is measured is unimportant.
Yeah.
It really comes in when you look at it with that layering.
Can I play devil's advocate?
Please.
For a sec. And my dad, when he retired, wanted to do something agricultural as well, and he went to work for an old stone fruit farmer, an old German guy, out in the Dural area, and he had some beautiful peach trees that produced absolutely lovely fruit, right? He knew his trade, but every time one of the peach trees in his orchard or a block of peach trees turned 20 years old, he pulled them up. Right. Now, they had great fruit on them. They were still performing really well, but he'd pull them up and he'd replant another batch of peach trees, same variety or different variety, it didn't matter too much. For him, he said, when a tree becomes 20 years old, the sap flow reduces. It's an older tree. It's not. You could funnel all the food you like into it, but it's not going to perform.
Wow.
And so he pulls it up and he plants a new one. Right now, it's somewhat disposable society, but this was an old man. He wasn't sort of instant gratification or anything like that. But that was his view, that you just pull them up.
I like his style.
But is that the answer to places like park properties? Or should we really be working on rejuvenation, pruning?
In the case of, say, macadamia trees, I will go for that option. In the case of, say, where we're talking stone fruit, citrus, etc., which is a tree that doesn't... Remember I said about farm for your kids, farm for your grandchildren?
Yeah.
So you've got this tree that has an age. Now, I reckon your dad is on the mark.
Well, no, he wasn't his theory. My dad was shocked that he was pulling out perfectly good trees. He was sad at it, actually.
Do you think when a tree carks it around here that I take delight in it? I'm going to tell you, it's like cutting off a limb of myself.
And as soon as I bought the farm, I loved my trees and I didn't want them to die for any reason, whether that be storm or whatever else. So the idea of pulling up trees is very, very tugging on the heartstrings.
Oh, geez. You asked me if I'd ever pruned.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I set out, I bought the place in 87 and 88, I'm going home. I'm going to prune to a central leader. I've learned, okay. It was so gut-wrenching, I stopped on tree one. I could not do it, Daniel.
Yeah.
I could not.
Yeah, but I think... you've managed to keep your trees in check by what you feed them. You're not overfeeding nitrogen and that sort of stuff. And obviously the trees are maintaining a decent size. You've got ground cover between the rows and it's a 12 metre spacing. Right? That's great. But what if you had Park Properties today and you know the place intimately
Yeah.
and you've seen it, hopefully within the last couple of years, and you've seen how overgrown it is, what would you do?
I would bang up, okay? It requires money, and the people who purchase it don't have the free-flowing money, okay? This is
Right.
one of the reasons for a lull. It requires money. Firstly, you're going to have to feed the little babies. Secondly, you clear the passage so that your machinery can get through without causing damage. So you make it workable.
Right.
Now, here's the start of your caretaking.
It all needs skirting too, by the looks.
Would they ever?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of thinning you can do. All of the rest of that.
But would you
don't just
would you
plough
prune?
into the ground?
Would you prune?
I would. Firstly, in that farm in particular, you've got great spacing. You can, nobody's maximised their crop for many years, so a little bit of bunching up ain't going to set you back.
Okay.
But you've got to be prepared to feed, and that's the real key to it. When people have a cash flow problem, as the purchasers in the 90s or 2000s
Often
started to have with the stuff that was now being sold from the 70s and 80s, here's where your neglect comes in. And I made a comment on your video about where...
Well, there were years...
What's my good, that I'm doing?
But there were years when, for example, farmers were getting $1.20 or $1.50 a kilo for nuts. They couldn't afford to feed their trees.
No, you can't.
You can't just. Yeah. So you've been through those years as well, and people did. They presumably stopped feeding, stopped spending money on the trees until the price got better.
And guess what? Okay.
And it did.
Yeah, but I can tell you the stick thinning out. Okay, when you don't feed, there's your direct correlation.
You get your silver tops and So, but what, for Park Properties, would there be an advantage to replanting, or would you not go that far?
I would think that if you're going to wait another 10 years, etc., before you're even going to get your first crop, when you can get one in 2 years, if not before then even, probably, okay, even if it's token. Economically, I wouldn't even think of going down that path.
Right.
The other equation is you bulldoze all the trees in and you go and start with some other new crop or whatever else, okay? So either way, I would much prefer to see productive land used productively. And there was a very good Scots fellow, very smart man actually, he even appeared on Sale of the Century, a guy called Willie Whiteside.
Okay.
And he used to, when we drive through Alstonville, and you've commented, you've got all these farmlands and everything, and then you've got the blocks, which are Alstonville.
Yep.
And he had this beautiful Scottish accent, so I'm going to sound more like a pirate than a Scotsman, I'm afraid.
Yep.
Okay? But he'd go, Bruce, I don't think future generations are going to appreciate us putting all these concrete boxes on prime agricultural land.
Yeah. Well, they did put a stop to it. I know there were too many subdivisions, and eventually the government said, "Hold on a minute, this is Australia's best farmland. It's got to be used for food production."
There's only so many ways you can pull a woe to society's progression.
Yeah.
And the comment I made on yours last night with the bit about
the social good.
Should I do this? Questioning the good of what I'm actually doing.
Yeah.
And I can't question the good of what you're doing.
Yeah. But well, you and I are biased, but I was trying to find objective criteria to say, well, look, what we do is in fact good. I think if you grow a crop in its native habitat, it must almost always be good. I worry about irrigators or people who depend on irrigation to get the crop out, because I think in future they might come under attack. There's no attacking them yet.
Yeah.
They're not attacking macadamia farmers the same way they're attacking cotton farmers, for example. But the day may come.
Eventually, I think they say.
Yeah.
Well, everybody's going to come under it at some stage, because we all come under increasing scrutiny, and there's increasing numbers of media in which that scrutiny can be portrayed.
Yeah.
So, you get like that wild forest organics clown who, honestly, I might seem intolerant in some of my comments, but ignorance is just portrayed, and it's portrayed as effective communication.
There's ignorance, and then there's sort of misdirected experts as well. And look, my agronomist warns me, for example, saying, look, in 10 years' time, you're not going to be allowed to farm trees that are this high, because they'll limit spray height on equipment and you just won't be able to farm trees that are that high. So I said you've got to get the orchard under control and back in there. And so you're worried about the future and how things might work. But then, like I said, particularly around the areas you mentioned, Eureka, Federal, parts of Nashua, that sort of stuff, there are trees there which they need help. They need investment.
They do.
And yet they're just sitting there year after year after year.
Herein, okay, like people say to me, "Oh, Bruce, this is a nice place you own." Okay.
Yeah.
I correct them. I say it's a nice place that I caretake.
Yeah, I feel like a custodian too.
I mean, I'm going to pass on before this place subsides. Okay.
Yeah.
So one way or another, you're only a transient piece in the whole scheme of things.
Yeah.
And how you influence the caretake, I love your journey.
Yeah,
I'm going to tell you right now.
It's a good journey, but people do it in different ways. I mean, all the way from Kerry Packer, who never probably walked on his farm, to you, who at age 30, at the top of the corporate ladder, just give it all away. Before anyone's really made a career at all, you give it away at age 30, and you jump in, and I keep swapping from career to career. I mean, tomorrow I'm appearing in Lismore Court as a barrister. So it's a there's all different ways of making that journey. But I think if we explore those, and then we also look at where things have gone wrong in other people's journeys, and as well as things that are going right. And the next journey I make will be to Matty Kelby's place to show us a bit more of his journey, and that's a fascinating thing by itself. I think it'll. I can put it out there. If it helps others with their journey, that's great.
Yeah.
But just so long as none of us pretend that we know it all, because we clearly don't.
It's working.
And if the South Africans who've been lecturing us on how to do macadamias are now starting to come across our very problems, then we all clearly have a lot to learn.
Let me also say, with Matty, he intrigues me as well. He's growing in black soil. And let me come back to tax for you for one, maybe exit point even,
Okay, yep. Now we'll wind it up. Yep.
They gave tax incentives to grow wood for timber, eucalyptus, everything like this.
Yes.
In the 90s.
Yes.
They went big at this stuff. And
there's still some of it planted in Binnaburra and that sort of area.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, all of these plantations got set up. Okay.
Yep.
And I can show you one in Nashua from the flats, and the trees grew beautifully, really performed beautifully well, and everything like that. When it came time to harvest the wood, the conclusion was that the wood wasn't strong enough to be timber. And the reasoning behind that was because in the red soils they grew so fast that there was no strength in the timber. Here in Matty is in the black soils, and that is where they recommend you grow the timber. We have the climate for it beautifully, depending on what
of rainfall, growing, of course.
But it doesn't grow too quickly in the black soils. Now, I'm going to venture to say that with Matty's macadamias, that he's putting in, if he's looking like he is caretaking beautifully in his establishment, I'm going to sort of guesstimate that probably he's not going to run into the wind damage problems that the trees do on the red soil for that reason.
Well, it's a fairly exposed property. You'll probably get to see, but definitely wind can be an issue, and windbreaks can't solve everything.
No.
But definitely worth a look. But that's a story for another time.
The best windbreaks came from our mates across the ditch. Those New Zealand cats, they are so far ahead in a lot of ways.
Well, what do they plant?
No, they developed netting with posts.
And that's a windbreak.
As a windbreak. Well, what you're trying to do is deflect the wind.
You're disrupting it.
When it comes time to take him out, you can recycle pretty well. Secondly, you don't have things that's sapping into the nutrients, cutting off your light, doing any of this stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
These characters are smart enough to win the America's Cup.
Yeah, well, and they did. Yeah, damn them. Yeah. Anyway, Bruce, thank you very much again for your time. This has been a wonderful insight into properties and properties similar to that, and the mentality of corporate Australia that actually helped start an industry that we all love so much today. So much appreciated.
My pleasure, Daniel.
Right. I'll see you all later, guys. Bye for now.